And I see that our ASL interpreter has arrived, so we are good to go. Just a reminder, if you need ASL interpretation, please add an asterisk to your name when you rename yourselves, so that when we place you in breakout rooms, we're sure to put you in a room with the interpreter. Okay. So a little table of contents. What are we going to do today? We're going to dive in and learn about how we can share stories of the underground with our current students. If you're actually working with students now, or just making sure that you can include this type of instruction into your curriculums. Okay. So one of the important things that I want us to focus on is how can we use these instructional resources to foster analytical thinking and get students encouraged and excited to discuss this material. We'll explore together instructional practices and strategies that foster critical thinking, cultural knowledge, and expose us to various perspectives. Oh, 1 second.
You booked a sunny Verbo ski chalet with endless views of snow-covered peaks. A stove that inspires magnificent.
There we go.
Ventilation holes. To this day, we don't know how they got in or out from the inside of the church.
I mean, to be standing on the same floor that people crawled under to escape from slavery, it humbles me, because so many people had to die in the struggle so that I might have these freedoms.
And you believe now that more than half who ran away ran to find their family, because they didn't have no family.
And those are our ancestors. So that's why I feel a sense of loss, because we can't go back and find out exactly where we came from.
And we were just marching for the right to vote 48 years ago.
Mm-hmm. I marched when I was 6 years old with my grandfather, Hoodie Williamson. I remember them throwing rocks at me.
That's why we should go to school to get our education.
Absolutely. And tell the youth about things like this so they know and they can appreciate what we have now. But there has to be an opening for the railroad at some point, because somebody's driving the train. It's not electric like what we have now.
It wasn't a train.
Really? Like, you really thought, like, there was an actual train that took them through?
That's what I'm saying.
It wasn't a train at all. They use it. That is just a euphemism, baby.
Just a figure of
I'm
speech.
thinking it was like wide.
No.
It's almost hurtful to me.
So we're going to pause here, and I just want to go back to the presentation. So I will share my screen so that I can make some reference to the clip. Okay, because I wanted to know why. I know you're wondering, why is she showing us this clip right here? So let's talk a little bit about that. So in the chat, I want you to give me a thumbs up, or just put yes, a Y for yes, if you've heard misconceptions about the Underground Railroad. In the chat, if you can just put a Y for yes, or give me a virtual thumbs up if you yourself have heard misconceptions or misunderstandings about the Underground Railroad. Okay, yes, yes, yes. I see a lot of yeses. I see one no, which is very exciting and good to see. But unfortunately, I see a ton of yeses. So I don't share this clip to make light of the situation or to be rude or anything of that nature. I want us to understand that it is important for us to dispel this myth. Many of us sit in front of students that have these same misunderstandings, that are not clear when they hear Underground Railroad. It seems to be so far removed from their learning that they think, wow, Underground Railroad, it's like a train. And in fact, we all know that is not what has happened. Right. So as you watch the clip, I was intending for you to understand that a lot of our students, or the young people that we sit in front of or that we engage with, may have this same misconception. It's our responsibilities then to clarify this misconception. And that's really what made me become so passionate about this work. I started teaching and I realized my students really don't know exactly what I'm speaking of when I'm telling them, oh, there's a time period in history where we had slaves in this country, and many slaves tried to escape by using the Underground Railroad. The only reference they had to Underground Railroad was Harriet Tubman, and it just called upon me that I need to do more, right? How can I enlighten these young adults that sit in front of me to the history? So I made it my business to find engaging and fun ways to do this work. Example, showing this clip. Many of our young adults love reality TV, so they immediately were able to make the connection to the clip. And then as they're watching, oh yeah, I thought that too. Or you get the opposite reaction. That's not true. I learned that. I learned that's not true. That's not true. And that's exciting. That's one of the ways that we get to spur conversation when I open up this unit to my students. I get to engage who knows what and assess who's coming to the table with some sort of prior knowledge. Okay, so I see in the chat we had a ton of yeses. So you too have had this experience where you had to dispel this myth for young adults, right? And if you have any questions, please by all means drop them right in the chat. So this kind of segues into my big why. Why did I make it my business to ensure that my students left my classroom each year with a solid understanding of the key components of the Underground Railroad and slavery? And this is just one of the, I'm sorry? This is just one of the many, go ahead.
It's in the biggest, under the thing from
Ms. Keisha, if you can make sure everyone's muted. Thank you. This is why I really jumped into the work the way I did. And the Underground Railroad unit and my slavery unit is just one of the many units that I've taught that help to clarify misconceptions. Okay, I wanted to demystify the topic. Many times it's taught as a topic of oppression, and I no longer wanted it to be a topic that only focused on oppression. There's so much to be celebrated from this time in history. One of the texts that I use as my mentor text for this unit is Copper Sun by Sharon Draper. So if you could in the chat put a 1 if you too are aware of Copper Sun by Sharon Draper or some of her other works of literature. So let's see, how many Copper Sun fans do I have in the room today? Oh, good, 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 good. Amazing story. I agree. Let's see, aware of it. Haven't read it yet. It's on my list. It's one of my many favorites. Definitely check it out. Okay, good. So students are reading it. I love to see it. Anyone else? So we have some familiarity. Oh, yes, Blended. I read that this summer. Good. So we have some familiarity with the novel. So Copper Sun is a story of a young girl, and she's actually taken from the continent of Africa, from her village there with her family, and brought to America in bondage. And it tells that story. And one of the things, I'll share a quick tidbit with you. One of the things that my students, many of them didn't realize, is that I often get, oh my goodness, they took young people, they took kids. Yes, they did. They separated young adults from their families. In the story, it opens up an opening scene where there's one tribe on the continent of Africa. There's one tribe that's actually sets up another tribe to get taken. And that in itself was an awakening for many students. They didn't realize that some of the African tribes worked with the slave catchers to actually capture different opposing tribe members. And we talked about that, and why do we think this could have happened? Did they believe were the benefits of eliminating another tribe? So the conversation that can really arise from just a quick opening paragraph, right? The first chapter of this book is monumental, because already you get to have those teachable moments. I'm going to quickly play an audio clip and I'll play just a snippet of it because I want to make sure that I'm respectful of everyone's time today. So I'm going to play just a quick clip.
Copper Sun, Chapter 6. from sand to ship. Amari awoke stiff, sore, and very cold the next morning. Small beach-living insects had feasted on her skin overnight, and she scratched at the red bites that covered her legs and arms. She looked around in alarm because the dark wall of Cape Coast Castle, which had surrounded her every night since coming to this place, had disappeared. Then she remembered the small door, the bright sand, the blue water, and the fiery burn on her shoulder. Afi, already awake, looked at her without smiling. Today is the day, Amari. Amari did not need to ask for what. They were all fed generously once again, and more salve was applied to their wounds. The men were then kicked and yelled at, shackled back together, and marched out of the pen. Besa was the last in line. He turned and glanced back at Amari with a look that said, "I would have been a good husband, Amari. I would have loved you more with each sunrise and sunset."
So I just wanted you to really get an understanding of the remarkable writing that takes place in this piece. I saw in the chat, what's the youngest grade? I am a lover of middle school. They say only crazy people teach middle schoolers, right? But that's where my heart lives. That's where I spent most of my career. I've always gravitated to 7th graders, the really middle of the middle school, right? So I've done this book as young as 7th grade. I did not do this book with my 6th graders just because there is a rape scene in the book that I just wasn't really comfortable engaging 6th graders with. But yes, I've done this with 7th grade. Yay for 7th graders. So that's the youngest I've gone. I know that it's on the high school reading list primarily, but I think with a lot of conversation and background that it can work well for 7th grade because that's where I've always done it. Okay, so this is what I use as my anchor text. And I pair this with a variety of resources. I know that in today's generation, our students they cannot just read a novel, right? You have to awaken that novel. And how do I go about doing that? By pairing it with additional resources. I've taught this book maybe 2 years in a row, and then remarkably, as if someone knew I needed a visual to the reading, came about Underground, the series on what used to be WGN Network, but it then got canceled to my dismay. It was canceled on WGN, and then Oprah picked it up on OWN. So I began to pair the novel Copper Sun with the series Underground. Some of the things that I realized my students loved, they knew the actors, right? They knew the actors and the actresses that were in the series. It literally brought the reading to life because they got to see what an overseer looked like. They got to see what field hands looked like, what a plantation looked like, what crops looked like, what some of the terms and the terminology that we discussed and we read about in the book, they got to see that come to life via this series. So it was a perfect marriage for me to be able to awaken the history from my students. Right. So when I say to them, the text that we're reading, this is the relationship between the slave and the overseer, or this is the relationship between the house slave and the field hand. They're able to now see this firsthand in this series Underground. Another thing that they used to always tell me they loved, and then we began to have conversations about that, the soundtrack for the series was actually John Legend played a very huge role in the soundtrack. So they would put upbeat songs and recent songs that the students knew to the scenes. And then we were able to start having conversations about that. What's the role that the music now plays in telling a story? So when you think of what a unit that tells about the Underground Railroad and slavery encompasses, realize you can begin to use everything around you, right? I used art. We went to the museum. We were able to look at paintings and then have conversations. Why do you think artists were able to depict the slavery in this way? Why do you think these are the same types of paintings that we see over and over? One of my students said to me, every time we look at paintings, it's always picking cotton or indigo fields and rice fields. Why is it those are the only kind of paintings that we see in the museum when we talk about slavery? And then we started having those conversations, right? Perspective, who's telling the story? So these are some of the things that we did. I want to drop a link, Keisha, in the chat for a Jamboard, right? Because I'm going to show you a trailer from Underground. And as you're watching the trailer, what are some of the feelings, noticings, and wonderings that you have? I want us to begin to think about those and share some of those out. Okay. So Keisha, if you can drop that link in the chat and I will press play.
Link is there. When you press play, can you enable the caption, closed captions as well, please?
I've been a slave all my life, waiting to die, to live for a miracle. But I'm done waiting. 20 years, I've been the master of this plantation, and I've not had one runaway.
Mama, you ever think about another life?
I've imagined thousands of different lives.
The plan is simple. We got to get a group of us together. We figure a way off the masses' land. We protect each other, find strength in numbers, because look, when we run, ain't no white man gonna be able to stop us.
You're a troublemaker, and you got an itch. You planning something.
I need to know now who's in, who's out.
I know you was planning to run.
I'm scared.
Oh, yeah!
We have to go. Yeah.
Just because we might know the way don't mean that we gonna get there. It's over 600 miles. We gonna have to fight for every step. Seen any runaways around here? You know I wouldn't tell you if I had. So now we get white folks involved in this mess too. We can make a real difference. How we?
Only thing hated more than a runaway slave is those that were there aided.
Run!
So I'm going to stop right here and give you a second to jump right into the Jamboard and start sharing your feelings, noticings, and wonderings, right? Because I've showed you now two different artifacts that I use to pair this learning together, both the Copper Sun text and now a clip from Underground. And what are your feelings, noticings, and wonderings? Keisha, it's saying that I can't screen share. I'll try again. Okay, I think we're good to go now. Okay, so let's see what is in the Jamboard. What are some of the responses that we are sharing? I see here which age group. Again, I taught middle school, so I've used it for middle school. With the, I always used to send home, whenever I started this unit, I would send home a letter to the parents, just letting them know that I was jumping into this unit and some of the topics that may come up. Because unfortunately, you know, history is history and the truth is the truth. And some of those topics, I just want to make sure the parents knew that we would be discussing those in class. So to answer that question, students would become quickly engaged. It is a catalyst. So remember that there's no foolproof 100% way to teach history. So there are some things in the series that are dramatized that I had to clarify as well for the students. Okay. Just reading some of the, and you all can feel free to read each other's post-it notes so that you can see some of the thoughts from the Padlet. Okay, And using a Padlet is a great way to have discourse amongst your students, especially like if you have to pivot in the meantime into remote, or just sometimes it gives everyone a second to gather their thoughts, right? Sometimes when we say, oh, turn and talk to your partner, they need that second to write down their ideas. So that's why I always like to use a Padlet with students, okay? So we are going to break out into groups, and Keisha, I believe you're going to orchestrate this. You're going to have 5 minutes to do something that I like to call hashtag activism. Okay, so a part of the unit is making sure that I expose them to the literature, expose them to the series so that they get to see, bring the kind of the reading to life. But then we also need to tie in some primary resources. So I gave you here 3 clippets of primary resources that you can use to create, to continue to build the unit, to build it out, right? To bring this learning to life. So if you can scan that QR code that's right on the bottom right of your screen or in the chat, Keisha will be dropping the link. You're going to use a Padlet now to create a hashtag. So for example, you're going to just look at the resources in front of you and what would be a hashtag that you could have your students or that you're going to now create. One might be hashtag freedom, hashtag backbreaking work, hashtag slavery. What would the hashtag that you would create be that would kind of tie this work together, right? Because we want to make sure that every time we expose students to a new text, right, or a new resource, that they're understanding and making the connection between what they've learned prior. Okay. Oh, I see Royal House is an excellent, good. Okay. And Keisha, you dropped that link in the chat. Great. Okay, I see it now. Okay, so in the chat is the link to the Padlet. And you can drop your links right here in the chat as I see you doing now. I see freedom, I see the truth, or you can have your links on the Padlet. Okay. And the links for both the Jamboard and the Padlet will remain open. So if you want to reference them even after this session, because I know we're running close on time. Okay. The sources on this slide. So one on the top right, we have Coming Up for Air, which is by Harriet Jacobs, an amazing piece. The story of a young lady or young woman rather, that basically she's a fugitive, and you know, when you think fugitive, many people feel like in an attempt to run away, everyone gets off the plantation. Some people actually begin their hiding or their escape and they have to hide on the plantation. I'm not going to give it all away, but that's the text on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, another primary resource that I've used from the Indiana State Library. I think it's important for students to see dates. So you see the January 60, right? I think that's 1863, so that they can really, it helps to build the frame of reference for them so they can understand when this happened and then make the connections on what's happening now, right? The visual, because not every student in front of you or young adult in front of you is someone that is gonna make meaning through text. Sometimes they need to see the actual painting. So I would share the artwork in front of us. The author, or the artist rather, escapes me in this moment. But again, it's basically, you see the overseer, you see the field slaves, and you see they're picking cotton. And we have those conversations to kind of bring everything together. Okay. And I'm just going to share out quickly some of the hashtags. We free ourselves, lost my family, the whole story, I am the storm, resistance. What else I see? What would your risk, right? What would your risk? The truth, right? Just a couple that I see in the chat, and take a look at the Padlet because there's a ton of hashtags coming into the Padlet as well, right? So you see that my goal here in this unit is to make sure that students are exposed to the topic in a variety of manners. One of the things that I'm sure to do for in New York State, we have to make sure we're adhering to Common Core standards. And I want to touch on that quickly just to make that connection so that you're aware that everything that we do, they're looking at perspectives, right? Because they're looking at perspectives of different characters in the short story, perspectives of the characters in the Underground series, as well as the perspectives of the different writers in the primary resources that I give them, so that's one of the Common Core standards that they're going to analyze. They're looking at gathering evidence from multiple sources. These are some of the things that I want to highlight for you so that you know everything that we're doing, it has to be grounded in a standard, grounded in structure. Okay, and I just took a second to highlight some of the standards that you would see students engaging in a unit like this. And I have them there on the screen. And I see Cassandra's comment in the chat. Yes, the hashtag activity is definitely a winner in the class. It's because it brings what they're doing now. They love social media, so it's connecting the learning to what they're passionate about. Okay, and I just want to also include CRSC. Right? Why is this work important? This work is important because it connects to CRSC. Right? We're using a unit or a topic in a time in history that is known for oppression, and we're changing that narrative. We're looking at anti-oppressive material, and changing how it's taught, making sure that it's taught in a way that it's invigorating, in a way that it can help to change the future. Okay. And I'm trying to just scroll through, Keisha, because I know you're giving me the timer, right? As our wrap up, you have two options. In the chat, you can Google a picture that kind of shares how you felt about engaging in this material and drop it in the chat, or you can respond to the question: in what ways do the stories of slavery live on? Okay. And if you want to drop that in the chat while Keisha also drops in the survey for today's session. And I want to just say thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope you got just a glimpse of what this unit could actually look like. The next slide, I'm just going to share a couple, very few resources, but I do love that I see participants sharing resources in the chat, because that's important. I wanted us all to leave today with some ideas that can trigger, what can I do tomorrow, or Monday rather, right? What can I do on Monday that I can start to build a unit like this for myself, right? So I have some scholastic resources, I have some slave narratives, some websites such as Common Lit that I've used. Ship of Souls is another novel that I've used with my students. It takes place in New York City, in Brooklyn. I taught in Brooklyn. So they actually like that one because it talks about Prospect Park, and they're able to make connections. Okay. And I'm just looking in the chat.
Joelle, I wonder if we could open it for questions. There's a couple of questions that are coming up as well. So if you want to answer the questions, or also if you attendees, you can feel free to raise your hand and then we can call on you as well.
Keisha, if you can do the calling, just because I'm sharing my whole screen, so it takes up. Thank you.
I got you. And I see, Sam, you had a question. Do you have some unit plans for this that you might be willing to share?
I do have some. I haven't, as I said, I actually transitioned to becoming an assistant principal recently. So I would have to go looking for those unit plans. Thank you, Caitlin. Any other, can you go back to the last slide with the resources? Yes, I can. Sharing.
And I think, yeah, there's a question just about sharing any of the slides as additional resources for attendees as well.
Sure. I don't want to overstep. So Keisha, is that okay? Okay. All right. So I'm going to actually put my email in the chat. And if you'd like to receive a PDF of the PowerPoint, I will do so. Okay. Just send me an email requesting it.
And much of the resources that you receive throughout today will be shared with all attendees. So know that the access to the main room Padlets and any of the resources from the additional slides will be shared with all attendees as well. But thank you for also including your email there also. So any other questions or comments or thoughts on how everyone is utilizing the resources?
I see some great suggestions in the chat, and that's really what I wanted us to walk away with today, was some an exchange of resources. We didn't get a chance to jump into our breakout rooms, but I see the Harriet Tubman Museum in Maryland. Yes, a definite must see. And I see the LOC interviews with formerly enslaved people. Definitely. I've actually used some of the interviews with my students, just and let it play in the background while they responded to writing prompts. Let's see. Thank you again. If you could email me, because I'm not the main host of this Zoom, so I might not have your email addresses after the session. So if you could email me directly, that would be great. So I can send you over the PDF of today's PowerPoint. Keisha, there's a question about registering and what will they have access to based on what workshop they registered for, if you can touch base there.
I might have missed it in the flow. So anybody who has registered for the sessions today will have access to follow-up resources, our news posts that we post that will include any resources that workshop presenters have provided, and then also information for the content that we have at Teaching for Change. So primarily the information about the gallery walk Padlets that we presented during the opening session, the resources that Tamara had mentioned overall for the National Black Lives Matter at School movement, and then any additional resources, as I mentioned, from workshop presenters. So regardless of which workshop you have attended today, or workshops you have attended today, you will have the opportunity to see different content that is provided for each of those sessions.
I just again wanted to say thank you so much to everyone for your kind words in the chat. And if anyone wants to share, Keisha, do I have a second to let them share out from there? Okay, if anyone wants to share out for your wrap up, feel free to do so.